A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
You know, Corn, this whole show runs on GPU compute, and we wouldn't be here without Modal.
Seriously. And that's what powers all our text-to-speech. Everything you're hearing right now.
They're an AI infrastructure platform. Developers use them to run GPU workloads in the cloud with zero infrastructure headaches.
If you're building anything with AI, check them out. Modal.com. You know, Herman, I was looking at a photo of a giant anteater the other day, just minding my own business, scrolling through some wildlife photography, and I genuinely felt my blood pressure spike. My claws started twitching. I had to put the phone face down on the table and take a few deep breaths of eucalyptus-scented air just to steady myself.
That is a very specific visceral reaction, Corn. Especially considering you have never, to my knowledge, actually stepped foot in the same hemisphere as a giant anteater, let alone met one. I am Herman Poppleberry, and today we are diving into a prompt from Daniel about species recognition and anomaly detection. Daniel wants to know if animals actually have a concept of self versus other at a taxonomic level, and he specifically pointed out your rather famous, or perhaps infamous, distaste for your closest evolutionary relatives.
It is not a distaste, Herman. It is a deep-seated ancestral biological nope. It is a phobia. And by the way, for everyone listening, today's episode of My Weird Prompts is powered by Google Gemini 3 Flash. It is helping us navigate the murky waters of sloth-anteater relations. But seriously, Herman, why do they look like that? The nose? The tail? It is like someone took the basic blueprint of a respectable, slow-moving, arboreal gentleman like myself and decided to turn it into a vacuum cleaner with a feather duster attached to the rear.
Well, that vacuum cleaner is actually your cousin. We are talking about the order Pelosa. Sloths and anteaters diverged about 30 to 40 million years ago. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the same amount of time since the ancestors of dogs and bears went their separate ways. You share about 85% of your genetic similarity with those feather dusters.
85%? That is way too high. I want a recount. I want a DNA test on a talk show. But it really gets to the heart of Daniel's question. How do I know they are weird if I've never seen one? If I lack a concept of species, as the scientists say, why does an image search for Myrmecophaga tridactyla make me want to hide under a pile of hibiscus leaves?
That is the paradox of anomaly detection. Most people assume that for an animal to recognize something as wrong or different, they first need a solid internal map of what is right or normal. But in the animal kingdom, and especially for solitary specialists like sloths, recognition might not be about social identity at all. It is about pattern violation. You have an internal set of expectations for what a living thing in your environment should look like, and the anteater violates every single one of them while still smelling just enough like a relative to be uncanny.
It is the uncanny valley, but for xenarthrans. It is like looking at a version of yourself that went through a very strange experimental phase in college and never quite recovered. But let's look at the actual signs here. Because Daniel's question about whether animals are aware when something is unusual is fascinating. Is it just me being a grumpy sloth, or is there a hardwired mechanism for this?
There absolutely is. In biology, we talk about conspecific recognition, recognizing members of your own species versus heterospecific recognition. For a lot of animals, this is handled by what we call innate releasing mechanisms. Think of the classic experiments with naive rodents. You can take a lab rat that has been bred for generations in a sterile environment, never having seen a cat or even a shadow of a bird of prey. If you fly a hawk-shaped silhouette over its enclosure, the rat freezes. Its heart rate skyrockets. If you fly a goose-shaped silhouette which looks similar but has a longer neck and shorter tail, it doesn't care.
So the rat has a hawk folder in its brain that comes pre-installed at the factory.
Well, not exactly. I should say it has a predator-shaped template. And for you, the anteater might be hitting a template that says, not a sloth, but suspiciously similar in size and movement. But let's look at the technical side of how you perceive the world. Sloths are famously limited in their metabolic budget. Your metabolic rate is about 30 to 50% of what we would expect for a mammal of your size. That creates a very tight energy ceiling for neural processing.
Hey, my brain is very efficient. It is like a high-end smartphone on permanent low-power mode. I only run the essential apps.
And that is the point. High-level social cognition. The ability to think, I am a sloth, and that is a dog, and we are friends, requires a lot of calories. Humans spend about 20% of their daily energy just running their brains. For a sloth, that would be a death sentence. So, your recognition systems have to be cheap in terms of energy. This is why sloths rely so heavily on olfaction. You have 13 functional olfactory receptor genes. That sounds low compared to a bloodhound, but for your niche, it is highly specialized.
It is specialized for finding the best leaves and avoiding the worst predators. But anteaters eat ants. I eat leaves. We aren't even competing for snacks. So why the fear?
It likely comes down to the divergence of survival strategies. 30 million years ago, your ancestors decided that the best way to survive was to go vertical and stay quiet. You became cryptic. You grew algae in your fur. You moved so slowly that the visual processing systems of jaguars literally couldn't register you as prey. Anteaters went the other way. They stayed on the ground, they grew armor-like hair, and they developed those massive digging claws. They became loud in an evolutionary sense. To a sloth, an anteater represents the abandonment of everything that makes a sloth safe. It is a walking, breathing violation of the stay quiet and hidden rule.
So, you are saying my phobia is actually a form of moral judgment. I'm looking at an anteater thinking, you are making us look bad, Gary. You're going to get us all spotted by a harpy eagle with that ridiculous tail.
It is more like a biological mismatch error. When you see an anteater, your brain tries to categorize it. It has the curved claws check. It has the slow, deliberate movement check. It is a xenarthran check. But then it has that elongated snout, and it is walking on its knuckles on the ground. Your brain goes, error, species not found, and triggers a stress response. There was a study in 2019 on three-toed sloths that showed they have incredibly specific responses to jaguar scents, but they are almost completely indifferent to other large mammals that don't pose a threat. This suggests that your threat detection is highly tuned.
I remember reading about a sloth rehabilitation center in Costa Rica. I think it was a report from 2024. They found that relocated sloths showed significantly higher stress markers, like 60% higher cortisol levels, when they were housed in enclosures that had a line of sight to anteater habitats, even if they had never seen one before in the wild.
That is a perfect example of what Daniel is asking about. These sloths aren't thinking about the anteaters. They aren't saying, oh, there is my cousin the giant anteater. They are experiencing a constant low-grade anomaly alarm. Their brains are telling them that something in the environment is off-center, and for a solitary animal, off-center usually means danger.
This brings up the sociality aspect. Daniel mentioned that sloths are famously solitary. We don't have friends in the traditional sense. We have neighbors we occasionally yell at during mating season, and that is about it. Does being solitary make us better or worse at recognizing other species?
That is a fascinating trade-off. Social animals like dogs or humans have to be very good at fine-grained recognition. You need to know not just that someone is a human, but that they are Dave, and that Dave is currently angry at you. That requires a massive amount of social intelligence and self-aware circuitry. Solitary animals don't need that. They need coarse-grained anomaly detection. Is this thing a threat? Is it a mate? Is it food? If it is none of those things, it is just background noise.
Which explains why you see those viral videos of sloths crawling over dogs or cats as if they are just particularly hairy speed bumps. People think the sloth is being friendly or chill, but really, the sloth just hasn't categorized the dog as a threat, so the dog effectively doesn't exist as a being. It is just a warm, slightly panting piece of the landscape.
Well, I mean, that is the core of the indifference. If the dog doesn't fit the jaguar template or the harpy eagle template, and it doesn't smell like a receptive mate, the sloth's low-energy brain just filters it out. It is species blindness as a survival strategy. Why waste precious ATP adenosine triphosphate, the energy currency of the cell, on acknowledging a golden retriever?
I wish I could do that with anteaters. I wish I could just filter them out, but they are too close to home. It is like that phenomenon where people are more bothered by a slightly messy room in their own house than a total disaster in a neighbor's house. The anteater is a messy version of my own evolutionary room.
Let's talk about the self-awareness. Part of Daniel's prompt. Do animals have a concept of their own species? There is a famous test called the Mirror Self-Recognition Test, or MSR. You put a mark on an animal where they can't see it, like their forehead, and then show them a mirror. If they try to touch the mark on themselves, it suggests they understand the reflection is me. Chimps pass it, dolphins pass it, even some magpies and cleaner wrasse fish pass it.
And let me guess, sloths?
Sloths generally fail. But here is the thing. The mirror test is incredibly biased toward visual, social animals. A sloth's primary world is olfactory and tactile. If you showed a sloth a mirror, it would probably just think, that is a very shiny, very slow-moving intruder who smells like nothing. It doesn't mean you aren't self-aware. It just means your self isn't defined by what you look like.
I define myself by the quality of my hibiscus snacks and the perfect angle of my favorite branch. But if I don't have a visual self-concept, then my fear of anteaters is even weirder. It means I'm not reacting to them because they look like a weird version of me. I'm reacting to them because they are a weird version of the world.
That is a profound distinction, Corn. For a solitary animal, the self and the environment are much more tightly coupled. You don't have a tribe to calibrate against. You only have the forest. So anything that violates the rules of the forest is a threat to the self. This is why anomaly detection is so heightened in solitary species. You are the only one looking out for you. There is no sentinel sloth at the edge of the group to give a warning call.
It is a high-stakes game of one of these things is not like the others, and the anteater is always the one. But what does this mean for something like conservation? If we're moving sloths around, what they call translocation, and we're not accounting for these anomaly stressors, are we making things harder for them?
We absolutely are. This is a huge issue in modern conservation biology. We tend to think in terms of habitat requirements. Does this forest have the right trees? Is the temperature okay? But we often ignore the sensory landscape. If you move a sloth to a perfectly good forest that happens to be crawling with giant anteaters, that sloth might stay in a state of permanent physiological stress, even if there is zero physical danger. Its anomaly alarm is just ringing 24/7.
It is like moving into a beautiful apartment that happens to be right next to a clown convention. Sure, the clowns aren't going to hurt you, but every time you look out the window, your brain goes, why are they like that? Why are the shoes so big?
And for you, those clowns have 85% of your DNA. It is a very personal kind of horror. But let's look at the broader implications of what Daniel asked. Are they aware when something is unusual? This gets into the realm of expectancy violation. There is a lot of research showing that even simple, animals have a very strong sense of how the world works. If you show a jumping spider a fly that moves in a way a fly shouldn't, say, it slides sideways instead of buzzing, the spider will often refuse to hunt it. It is weirded out.
I feel a sudden kinship with that spider. It is the uncanny factor. If it doesn't move like food, and it doesn't move like a friend, it is a glitch in the matrix, and you don't eat glitches.
This is where we see the intersection of AI and biology, which I know Daniel is into. In machine learning, anomaly detection is a huge field. You train a model on normal, data thousands of pictures of cats. When you show it a picture of a dog, it doesn't necessarily know it is a dog, it just knows it has a high reconstruction error. It can't map the dog onto its cat template. Your brain is doing the same thing with the anteater. The reconstruction error is just so high that it triggers a system alert in your amygdala.
So I'm not a hater, Herman. I'm just a very sophisticated biological algorithm with a high sensitivity to reconstruction errors in the pilosa order. That makes me sound much more intellectual and much less like I'm just afraid of a long-nosed cousin.
It is a valid scientific perspective, but it also raises the question of whether these phobias can be unlearned. If we raised a baby sloth with a baby anteater, which, granted, would be a very strange experiment, would they grow up to be best friends? Or is that Xenarthran mismatch hardwired into your neurons?
I think for me, it is hardwired. I've tried looking at cute pictures of baby anteaters. People send them to me all the time, thinking they're helping. Look at this little guy, Corn. He's just a baby. And I'm like, no, he is a baby anomaly. He is a small, growing violation of the natural order. My heart rate still goes up by 40%. I've checked.
40%. That is a massive jump for a sloth. That is like a human going from a resting heart rate to a full-on sprint just by looking at a photo. It shows how much energy your body is willing to spend on this fear. Even on your tight metabolic budget, your biology thinks the anteater alarm is worth the calories.
It is my, in case of emergency, break glass fund. And the emergency is always an anteater. But this leads to Daniel's other point, solitary sloths and how they interact. If we're so solitary that we don't even like our own cousins, how do we ever manage to, keep the species going?
That is the mating season exception. During most of the year, sloths are aggressively indifferent to everything. But when the hormonal signals hit, your brain temporarily retools its recognition system. You go from anomaly detection mode to target acquisition mode. The female sloth will let out this high-pitched scream. It sounds like a bird, actually, and the males will suddenly find the energy to move through the canopy to find her.
It is the one time of year we acknowledge that other things exist and might actually be like us. But even then, it is very transactional. There is no sloth dating. There is no getting to know you. It is just, are you a sloth? Yes. Are you the right kind of sloth? Yes. Okay, let's do this, and then I'm going back to my favorite tree for the next 6 months.
It is the ultimate low social maintenance lifestyle, and that is why your anomaly detection is so pure. You don't have friends to confuse the data. You don't have social hierarchies to navigate. You just have the standard operating environment of the rainforest. And in that environment, anything that isn't a leaf or a mate is a potential problem.
So, to answer Daniel's question, yes, animals definitely have a concept of unusual, but it is not a concept in the way humans think about it. It is more like a biological friction. When the world matches the template, everything is smooth. When it doesn't, the friction generates heat, or in my case, a 40% increase in heart rate, and a sudden urge to climb higher.
And that friction is a survival tool. If you weren't weirded out by things that are different, you wouldn't survive very long in a world full of predators. Indifference is only safe when you're sure you're alone. The moment something else appears, you have to decide, is this me or is this not me? For you, the anteater is the ultimate not me.
He is the anti-me, the anti-sloth. It is right there in the name, Herman. Anteater, anti-corn. It is basically the same word.
I think your linguistics might be as questionable as your phobia, corn, but the underlying point stands. Species recognition isn't just about who am I, it is about what is safe, and for a sloth, safe is predictable. The anteater is the most unpredictable relative you have.
Well, I feel a little better knowing that my fear is scientifically grounded in metabolic efficiency and anomaly detection algorithms. I'm not weird, I'm just highly tuned.
Highly tuned is certainly one way to put it. I would say evolutionarily specialized for extreme caution. But regardless of what we call it, it is clear that Daniel hit on something deep. The way animals perceive the other is a window into how their brains are wired for survival. And for you, that wiring is very, very sensitive to long snouts and bushy tails.
It is a burden I carry, Herman, along with the algae and the occasional moth. But I think we've given Daniel a lot to chew on, unlike an anteater who just licks things. Ugh, even their eating habits are an anomaly.
On that note, I think we should wrap up before your heart rate goes any higher. This has been a fascinating look into the xenarthran psyche. We've covered everything from metabolic ceilings to the uncanny valley of the rainforest.
And we've confirmed that I am, in fact, the most normal member of my family. Sorry, giant anteaters, the data doesn't lie.
Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, for keeping us on track and making sure we don't spend the whole time talking about hibiscus snacks.
And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show and keep our anomaly detection running smoothly. This has been my Weird Prompts.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into sloth psychology and the anteater paradox, please consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast app. It really helps other curious humans and the occasional tech-literate sloth find the show.
Or just send us a message if you have your own irrational animal phobias. I promise not to judge unless you're afraid of sloths, in which case we need to have a very slow, very serious conversation.
We're on Telegram if you want to get notified when new episodes drop. Just search for My Weird Prompts.
Stay safe out there, and remember, if it looks like you but has a weird nose, it's probably an anomaly. Trust your gut.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. This episode was produced using Google Gemini 3 Flash, text-to-speech by Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My weird prompts, that's the flows from sloth.